this week's sugya is based on the Vachadika Parsha, and it's also a major sugya in a mumar, kuti, karoim, and various different sects throughout the generations that somewhat diverted from Derech Hashem, from Derech Eitz HaChaim. So let's start off with the posuk of this week's parsha. When Yitzchak tells Esav, go, bring me some food, va'ato sono, kel yacho, tel yacho, v'kashtecho, v'tzei asod, v'tzudu litzayin. And Targum Onkelos interprets, sav kan zenach, seifach v'kashtech, v'poch l'chaklo, v'tzud litzeidu, and Rashi says, sono, היוםהשחור. אין משחיזן נססקן. חדי צקינכו ושחוית יופו, שלא תאכילני נבלה. That is not pshuto shel mikra, but Rashi has an amazing interpretation that Yitzchak tells Esav, prepare your chalaf, take care of the second shel shchita. I don't want to eat nevela. And then the big question arises. Lecha oira, Esav has a din of Yisrael mumar. That's a Gemara in Kiddushin. Rav Chia Barov and Amar Rav Yochanan. Oivet kechovem yorish esav dvar Torah. D'chsev ki yorishen Esav l'sati eser seyam. The Gemara says we cannot prove from this pasuk that a non-Jew has Yerusha, Dilmi Yisrael Mumer Shaina. So the Gemara seems to say that Esav was a Yisrael Mumar. Now, we will not go into a major discussion. It's very interesting that the Mishnah Melech was one of the first giants amongst the Achrayim to herald in the Yeshiva Shederech HaLimud. Before the Tzais and the Nesidus, the Mishnah Melech was one of the first, together with the Machne Ephraim, that was Machadish the Lomdische Mahalach. And the Mishnah Melech has a sefer called Proshas Drochim. Proshas Drochim is Drush, not Lomdis. There's a lot of Lomdis as well in Proshas Drochim, but fundamentally it's Drush. And most of the Proshas Drochim deals with one question. What was the din of the Avos before Matan Torah? Din Yisrael or din B'nai Noach? In Mechasor Shechumash Bereshis, I dealt with this question extensively, but it's not going to be the focus of today's shiur. Just want to mention it's a major discussion. Many rayas lekan ulachan, but this Gemara clearly says, Esav, before Matan Torah at a din of Yisrael Mumar. Now, in Chulin Daf Hey, the Gemara says Shchitas Mumar Psula. So how did Yitzchak eat Esav's Shchita? If Esav has a din of a Mumar, Shchitas Mumar Psula. So you would say, but it was before Matan Torah. But we all remember the Gemara in Yom Daf Chav Ches. Kiyem Avom Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula Ad Shelo Nitno. And Yitzchak probably did the same. Even though in Shuvas HaRamah, the Ramah says no, only Avraham. But it's a pele. Because Rashi that we all remember, Im Lovan Garti, Betaryag Mitzvos Shumati. So Rashi says Yaakov Avinu was Makayim Taryag Mitzvahs, Avraham Avinu was Makayim Taryag Mitzvahs. Would we say that Yitzchak was an exception? Extremely unreasonable. So we are to assume that Yitzchak, like his father Avraham, like his son Yaakov, was Makayim Taryag Mitzvahs. So he didn't eat nevela, and Rashi clearly says Shaloi Tachileni Nevela. But Shchitas Mumar is nevela anyway. In my Sefer Minchasos, I quoted the Yismach Moshe. And I heard this Yismach Moshe from Moiri V'Rabi, the Kloisam of the Rebbe, Sechet Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Bracha, my great Rebbe. And I heard him quote this Yismach Moshe a few times, and it's a beautiful Yismach Moshe. The Yismach Moshe says, how come Yitzchak loved Esav? Was he totally blind and he didn't know his own children? Wasn't he aware that Yankov is Ishtam Yosef Olam? And Esav doesn't come into the Bismedish. Esav is a hunter, spends all his time in the woods killing animals, running around. Wasn't he aware that Esav was a Ishdaman and Yankov was a tzaddik? So the Yismach Moshe comes up with an amazing thought. It's drush, but it's beautiful. On the other hand, question number 2. How come Yitzchak ate Esav Shlit if Esav was a mumar? So the Yismach Moshe says, Esav was a Rosh, but he was makbid in Kibud Av. And he was aware that he's not a tzaddik. So whenever Esav used to bring animals that he caught, he used to ask Yankov to shecht for him. And the Yismach Moshe quotes sources that a real tzaddik, when he eats meat, he could be margish who was the shecht. So when a tzaddik, I assume not every tzaddik, but a tzaddik in the level of the Yismach Moshe, the Ovis Ekdoshim, when he eats a piece of meat, he could sense and feel who was the sheichet. Not exactly who he was. Was he Yitzchak or Moshe or Pinchas or Gedalia, but was he a tzaddik? And what was his level of ruchnis? So all the Lashon Haras that people told Yitzchak about Esav, what an awful person he is, and he doesn't learn. Yitzchak was even more inspired, and he loved Esav ever the more, because he eats Esav Shchita, and he knows that he's a tzaddik Yisadoilam. So obviously he's a tzaddik Nistar, and he is so successful in concealing his tzidkes. And that is why Yitzchak ohev es Esav ki tzayid bepiv. That's a new interpretation, ki tzayid bepiv. And Yitzchak thought to himself, his tzayid is in my mouth. And I know what a tzaddik he is. He shechts the animals, he feeds me. Yitzchak didn't know the secret that Yankov Avinu was the one, is his sheichet. First time Esav comes back, Yankov is nowhere to be found. Of course he's nowhere to be found. He's hiding, because that's after Yankov pulled the trick and he pretended to be Esav. He disguised himself as Esav. So Yankov was hiding somewhere. Esav has no choice. He shechts himself and he gives it to Yitzchak. It's the first time that Yitzchak eats the meat and he feels something is wrong. So that's an amazing interpretation, an amazing approach. So according to the Yismach Moshe, Esav didn't actually shecht. It was Yankov that did the shchita for Yitzchak, and that is why Yitzchak was so overcome by Esav's tzidkes. So let me share a story with you, which is a bit amusing, but whenever I quote the Yismach Moshe, I add on. A story I heard from my great Rebbe about the Yismach Moshe himself. So the Kloiser Magadim was an anicle of the Yismach Moshe. The Yismach Moshe was the great-great-great-grandfather of both the Satmar Rebbe and the Kloiser Magadim. He was the Rabbi Noel, Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, the Zayda of the Yeit of Lev. And the Yeit of Lev was the first Siggeter Rebbe, and the Satmar Rav was an anicle of the Yeit of Lev. And the Yismach Moshe's grandfather, the Yismach Moshe was a very close friend of the Chassam Sofer, who was one of the greatest Gedolim at that time. So the Kloiser Magadim used to tell the story of the Yismach Moshe as a younger man. He lived in a very modest apartment, as was the minig in those days. He had one room. And there was a curtain in the middle of the room. The bedroom was on one side of the curtain and the kitchen was on the other side. He used to learn day and night. He used to come home late at night, his wife was already asleep, and he didn't want to put on the lights to wake up his wife from her sleep. So he ate in the dark. And his wife used to prepare supper, and he used to eat a bowl of soup and a piece of meat every night. One night he comes home, and there was some confusion. I don't know who was to blame, whether the Rebbitzin or the Yismach himself. But instead of eating the bowl of soup and the piece of meat, he ate the soap water and the shmata, which his wife used to wash the dishes. And he confused that with the soup and the meat. In Israel, they call it a scotch brite. It's the little rag which you use to wash cutlery or wash your dishes. Most people in America don't wash dishes anymore because everybody has a dishwasher. In Israel, dishwashers are still quite uncommon, and we do wash dishes. So anyway, so the Rebbetzin gets up in the morning, and the Yismach Moshe is back in Yeshiva, back in Koilel, back in Shiur. And she's astounded he didn't touch supper. And then she walks over to the sink and wants to wash the dishes, and she doesn't find the water with the soap and the little rag. And then suddenly it dawned on her, she understood. That's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Yud Ches. So she waits for him till he comes back home late at night the other night. And she asks him, my dear husband, Moshe, how was the soup and meat yesterday night? Did you like it? And he says, the soup was great, but I chewed and chewed and chewed the meat and it didn't dissolve. So I just swallowed it whole, as is. So that's a beautiful story. And I say, when you no longer feel the taste of soup and meat, that is when you start feeling the taste of the shochet. As long as you differentiate between a rag and a piece of meat, between soap water and chicken soup, you can't feel the ta'am of the shochet. When you no longer feel the ta'am of the food, it is then that you start feeling the taste of the shochet. So anyway, let's get back to the Yismach Moshe. That's derech drush, beautiful drush. And I also quoted another Dvar drush, if we scroll down on our source sheet, which is the Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer deals with a medrash. So let's have a look at the medrash. I think the medrash is before the Chassam Sofer. Let's scroll the other direction. Here we are. A person, and it's a simpleton, asked Rav Hoshaya, if I'm going to give you a beautiful thought, will you quote me in public? Let's hear what you have to say. All those gifts Yaakov gave Esav, and that's a Pashas Vayishlach. When Yaakov gives Esav so many animals and sheep and cows and all those gifts, all that will come back to us. My Tami, Malchet Tashish ve'iyem mincho yashivo. Yaviu enksiv God, eri yashivo. Omalai chayecho, milatova amres, momishmoich anu oimerla. Rav Hoshaya loved that thought, based on a posuk in Tehillim. So all the gifts Esav get Yaakov, ultimately in the days of Mashiach will come back to us. The Chassam Sofer quotes Yefei Toya. Yefei Toya is probably the Chashuv's the Perish on the Medrash. The Chassam Sofer quotes the Yefei Toya that Liyosed Lavoi, the Umas Oilam will return all those gifts with ribis and ribis the ribis. And that'll be thousands of years of interest. You could just imagine how much that will be worth. And the Chassam Sofer goes into a lengthy discussion in Hilchos Ribis, which I don't think we need to discuss now, because that really brings us into Hilchos Ribis, complicated sugas of Hilchos Ribis. But the question comes up once again. Esav was a mumar. So are we entitled to take that ribis? So Minatara, there's no Esav ribis from a guy. But the one that took the loan was Esav. So it's not exactly a loan. Yaakov Avinu definitely get a gift. So one could delve into a lengthy discussion. So on one hand, it's an issue that you can't give a loan to a non-Jew with ribis, and that's an issue that we're dealing with mekech hamemka, not with a loan, and we're dealing with a guy. So let's put all this aside because we really want to learn the sugya of mumar. But these are just two different divrei drush, and both discuss the status of Esav HaRosh. Was he a mumar? Was he a goy? Regarding shlit on one hand and ribis on the other hand. Let's start our discussion about the din of a mumar. And our discussion will focus not only on mumar, kuti, karai. So the kutim are a sect, a very ancient sect that goes all the way back to the days of Melech Ashur, Aseres HaShvotim, and the story of the kutim, the source is in Malachim, Beis, Perek Yud Zayin. And soon, we will check what's the story with the kutim. The Karaim are a sect that developed many, many generations later. And after the Karaim, throughout our history, again and again and again, there were those that left the fold.
You can take some cipher down.
So let's just scroll down, first of all, to the Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Ribis. Semen Kuf Nun Tes. Mumar Mutar Lahal Voisoy Beribis. Kuf Nun Tes actually deals with Goy, Mumar, Kuti, Karai. So see, Weiss Shulchan Aruch says, Mumar, Mutar Lahal Voisoy Beribis. Ba'osalil Vosmemeniribis. Why? The issue to collect ribis is because v'chai uchicha imach. And because a mumar einatu mitzuvah lahachir isai. He's not defined as uchicha. And therefore, we are allowed to lend the money beribis and collect the ribis from him. But we can't borrow money from him and give him ribis. That's a prohibition. But we could collect the ribis from him. Yes, and that's the Rama. So the Rama Paskins, a moment has all the dinam of a Ben Yisrael, totally. Shulchan Aruch differentiates. You can't give him ribis, but you could take ribis from him. And why is that? Siv Gimel deals with kutim. Kutim yesh lam din mumar la'avodas kachavim. Same din. So the Shulchan Aruch maintains a kuti has the same din of a mumar. Af al pi shechoto Yisroel hu. Same as a mumar. He's a Jew. Mutar lahal voisai. Because einatu mitzuvah lahachir isai, osa lilvoisei meno. Hakaroim, ein lehem din mumrim, asur lahalvotam beribis, vein tzorach lami she'asur lilvot behem beribis. So the Shulchan Aruch differentiates between kutim and karoim. Kutim are closer to goyim than karoim. I wrote a very substantial siman in Shalas Yeshuvas Minchas Osher Chelek Aleph Siman Yud. Not everybody agrees with my maskana. I dealt what is the din of the average secular Jew in our day and age. does he have a din of a mumar? And I wrote a lengthy tshuva. And I think it's an important tshuva. Anybody really interested, and I think everybody would be interested, I would recommend learning that tshuva. Shalas tshuva sminchas osha chelak siman yud. And I very powerfully wrote my opinion that the average Chiloni in our day and age has a din of a tinnik shenishba, and he's not a mumar. He's a tinnik shenishba. Even those that grew up in our camp, even those shona v'pirish, still have a din of a tinnik shenishba. In our day and age, with so much exposure and so much nisyanis and so much kfira, and I think even those that had a from upbringing and they left the fold have a din of tinnik shenishba. I can't go into the details now because it's not on our source sheet, but I would recommend learning. And what I write goes against many present-day gedolim, but I am so convinced, and I brought Weiss from the Shulchan Aruch. But going back many generations, the Shulchan Aruch differentiates between kutim and karoim. And why is that? But before we go into the various different categories, mumar, kuti, karai, let's have a look at the Taz. The Taz asks a very fundamental question. Kuti and mumar mutar lahalvoisai, osa lilvoisai meno. Lama mutar lahalvoisai? Because you're entitled to take ribis. It's not v'chayechichu imok. He's not ochichu b'mitzvahs. But if a mumar has a din of a Jew, you're allowed to collect ribis. But he is not allowed to pay ribis. So why isn't there lifnei yevar loisit michshel? He's Jewish. And even if he wouldn't be Jewish, there's an issur of lifnei yevar. Benayim shelo yoshet odom kos yayin ozav ha'eva men achai lebenoach. You're not allowed to be machshel even a goy with his isurim. So if a woman has a din yisrael, he's not allowed to pay ribis. And when we collect ribis from him, why isn't there lifnei yevar? The Taz comes up with a very chashuv yesod, and this is a very important yesod in Hilchos Ribis. The issur resting upon the loiva, upon the borrower, is secondary. The main issur is on the malva, on the lender. And I think fundamentally the understanding is it is always the perpetrator that is over avera and not the korban, and not the one that is hurt. Who is over on the lab of Loisigzal, the Gazlan or the Nigzal? Only the Gazlan. Who is over on the lab of Choivel, the Choivel or the Nechbal? Only the Choivel. Who has the avera of Loisignoivel? Is it the Ganev or the person whose money was taken away? It's only the Ganev. So why is it only by ribis that both parties are over avera? Why is the loiva over avera? So the reason is atu yotzam v'atu yodei yitzam. Kadosh Baruch Hu knows the nature of man better than anyone else could know. And Kadosh Baruch Hu knows. When people are pressured for money, they will pay any price. And when a person is willing to pay any price, there are always going to be bad people to take advantage of his desperation. And that is why the Torah, knowing how weak the borrower is and how cruel the lenders might be, and we see that. We see that all the time in the black market. People pay interest that is just impossible. And when you're strapped for cash, you will promise anything because you need money. So Libis is unlike Schilas Batim, Schilas Poyalim. It's not like renting a car. If you want to rent a car and you can't afford it, you won't rent a car. You're going to drive a bus. You're going to go by foot. But if you need money, you're going to pay any price. And when people need money, there will always be the bad ones that will take advantage of their need and their desperation. And that's why the Torah is Machmi Baribis. And the prohibition, the Aveda, is not only in the Malvis and the Loiva as well. But the Loiva is secondary. And therefore, when there is no Issa on the Malva, there also would be no Issa on the Loiva. That's the Chiddush of the Taz. We scroll down to the Shach Sif Kot Nehei. The Shach is Cholik and the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shach, based on the Shach, says, and mummer as a din goy. Kutim, not mummer. Kuti. Contrary to the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, that a kuti has a din mumar, tzorach hiyum, du kaimelon bekame duchte shegosi al kutim ba'osem ko'oivte kechomim gemurim. And the Shach argues that is not only lechumra, even lekula. And according to the Shach, a kuti has a din of a goy, mutar laharveis loy, but mutar gam lilvois mimeno. And this brings us to the fundamental sugya. Who were the Kutim? What's the story? It's not on our source sheet, but it should have been. But I just opened up the Novi, Malachim Beis Yud Zayin. If we could have it on the screen, I think it would be beneficial. If not, I will just read some of this parsha. Okay, here we are. Here we are. בשנה 12 לאוחז מלך יהודה מלך מולך, הושע בן אלה בשומרון על ישראל 9 שנים. ויעשה רע בעיני השם, רק לא כמלכי ישראל אשר היו לפניו. עליו עלה שלמנסר מלך אשור, ויהי לו הושע עבד, ויושב לו ימינך. So Shalmaneser, Melech Ashur, overpowered Hosea. And Hosea was like a slave to Melech Ashur. וימצא מלך אשור בהושע קשר אשר שולח מלאך המלסוע מלך מצרים. And then בשון הבא ויצא מלך אשור ויעשהו בית הכלא. Hosea was flung into the jail of מלך אשור. ויעל מלך אשור בכל ארץ ויעל שומרון ויוצר עליה 3 שנים. 3 years מלך אשור laid a siege to the Shomron. בשנה התשיעית להושע לחד מלך אשור את שומרון ויגל את ישראל אשורה. ויוסם מויסה בחלך וחבור נהר הגוזן וערי מדי. He exiled all the Jews from Shomron. And then he had a huge piece of land. What does he do with that piece of land? So he skipped many psukim towards the end of Perek Yud Zayin. Let me see where we are.
Go back to Chav Gimel. Go back to Chav Gimel. Let's start there. Go back to Chav Gimel.
What's Chav Gimel?
Vayavay Melech Ashur, Chav Dalet, sorry.
Okay, Pasuk Chav Dalet. V'yavei, he imported Pasuk Chav Dalet. V'yavei Melech Ashur meBabel u'mekuta u'ma'ava u'machamas u'sfarvayim v'yoshev be'orei Shomron tachas b'nei Yisrael v'yirshu et Shomron v'yeshvu ba'areya. So one of the cities in which he brought inhabitants was from Kuta. They were Goyim. So he exiled all the Jews, took them to Ashur, which in modern language in our history books is Assyria. It is to the north of Israel, and maybe that is the source of Syria. So Melech Ashur exiled the Jews, and he brought Goyim from Babel, from Kuta, and those are Kutim. ויהי בתחילת שבטם שם, לא יראו את השם. וישלח השם בהם איזה אריות ויהיו הורגים בהם. Lions attacked those goyim. ויאמר למלך אשור לאמור, הגויים אשר רגליסו ותוישה ויורה ושומר, לא יודו את משפט אלוקי הארץ, וישלח בהם איזה אריות, והנה ממיסה בייסם. So all those goyim from Kuta, came to Melech Ashur and they said, don't you see God is against us? You know, the lions are attacking us. We're being torn apart and killed. Obviously, the God of the land demands that we serve him. ויצא מלך אשור לאמור, הוליכו שמו אחד מהכהנים אשר הגליסם, bring back one of the kohanim that I exiled from the land, bring him back here and let him teach the goyim Darkei Hashem. And that is why there's a machlokes in the Mishnah and the Gemara whether kutam are gerei aroyes or gerei emes. So that's the story of the kutim. Now we go back to our source sheet, to the Gemara in Kedushin Daf Ayin Hey. And we find a machlokes when the Kohanim came back to teach the kutim what a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. We scroll down. Here we are in Kiddush. Ki yoser Rav and Omer Reb Chia Barabba, Omer Reb Yochanan, v'yamri la, Omer Reb Acha Bazavda, Omer Reb Chanina, v'yamri Reb Yankov Barida, Omer Reb Yeshua ben Levi, Sholosh machlokes v'dov Reb Yishmael Sova Kutam Gerei Aroyes. They were never honest in their conversion. They were just afraid of the lions, and that's why they pretended to convert. Kutam Gerei Aroyes then, v'kahanim shenit bahem kahanim psulam hayu, v'yaseh mitzvasem kahanei bamais, menakoisim sheba'am, and that's why they passed out the kutim. Rabbi Kiva Sober, Gerei Emesem, the koyim shenitmu bahem kahanim ksherim hayu. So it's a machlokes. What was the status of the kutim? However, both Tosfos in Masechet Chagiga and the Rambam in Perush HaMishnayos both maintain that was up to the days of Reb Meir. Reb Meir was later than Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Let's have a look at the Rambam. Kan nevayah lachu mayim akutim v'hu sha'am shehevi sancherev mekuta v'hoshiveim ba'arei Shomron hayed aleim hakosef es Hashem hayu yirei v'es Eloheim hayu ovdim אלו שהלכו להם הימים עד שלמדו את התורה ופרשו כפשוטו ומצווה שהחזיקו בו היו מדקדקים בו מחזיקים במאוהב והיו מחזיקים בהם מאמיני הדס מייחדים ואינם אוהבים עבודה זרה עד שחקרו חכמים אחריהם ומצאו מקדשים את הר גריזים וכשחקרו על סיבס סדום ומצאו להם באויס הר דמוסיונה ונוידע שהם אוהבים עבודה זרה אז הורידום במלס הגויים גמורים לכל דבריהם. כל מה שתמצאו במשנה מעניוני הקוטים שמראה שהם מעולים מן הגויים, וגרוע מישראל, כגון אומרם מזמנים עם הקוטי, קוטי המבורך, you can answer אומן, כל זה קוטים שבודקו אחריהם, אבל משבודקו אחריהם ומצאו, כמו שאמרנו, הרי הם גרוע מן הגויים מאוין. דאזויס. שלא נצטרך לחזור על הכלל הזה בכל מקום שנזכיר קוטי. And that was in the days of the Meir. So the Rambam and Tosfos maintain that a kuti has a din of a goy, and that's the shit of the shach. However, the Shulchan Aruch disagrees, and according to Shulchan Aruch, kutim have a din yisur. So this brings us to a fundamental question. The Rambam paskins in accordance to Rabbi Kiva, because the loch is always Rabbi Kiva neged Rabbi Shmuel. Kutim gerei emes. So how could you turn a Jew into a goy? If kutim gerei emes. So they found their ovdei avodah zorah, but their forefathers converted, and they were gerei emes. Halachic Rabbi Kiva. So how could we turn a Jew into a goy? Even lekula, because the Shach argues, there's no way to ribis be'akuti. Bein lekula, bein lechomra. You could collect ribis, you could pay him ribis, then like a goy. And the Shach is substantiated by Tosfos Chagiga and the Rambam. this brings us to an amazing Chasam Sofer. It's the last source on our sheet, but it's not the last source I will discuss with you today. Not the last. Semen Lamed Tes is about Ksivas Tfilin. And in Sif Aleph, Shulchan Aruch writes, a non-Jew, a woman, a cotton cannot write tefillin. And that is because the Menachos Membeis, the Gemara Darshans, Ukshartum lo yisradecha, Uchsaftum al mezuzos, Kol she'eshna b'kshira, yeshna b'chsiva. Kol she'einoi b'kshira, einoi b'chsiva. Those that don't have a mitzvah of tefillin are exempt from writing parshiyos of tefillin. Yeshna b'kshira, yeshna b'chsiva. Einoi b'kshira, einoi b'chsiva. And that is why a guy, a woman, even a cotton cannot write parshiyos. We're going to write, a moisa cannot write parshiyos. Why? A moisa, you know what a moisa is? I think recently, I'm not sure, but I think we had a shiur at some stage about the moisa. So let's have a look what the Chasam Sofer says. Abis Yosef Toma betama dorot. Ayin toises Yom Tov Mishnah Dalet. Toma lakutim. Igere emes en ha'echosem kenochem letaynis v'yoros shalehem. And that's the question we asked just a few minutes ago. If the kutim are gere emes, halochi kerebekiva, how do we understand osum kenochem? V'nere lafid is that. שיש כוח בחליסו להויצי המורדם בכלל האומו, ויחזר אל הגויים גמורים, אף לא כאל. It's amazing. Some Sofer says, Klal Yisrael collectively has the halachic authority and power להויצי אדם מן הכלל, להויציו מכלל ישראל, ויחזר אל הגויים גמורים. He brings two rayos. Very flimsy rayos. V'zeichel adovo, roviat regoyim. Posik in Chavakik, shehiti lehem zayin mitzvahs, babakam alamat ches. V'yaf agav delav raya gebura, mekol mokom kei nir'ali. V'hem nimnu v'gam lo roitziyo mebris Yisrael legam. What does the Sofer mean, afar pisha eino raya gemura? Of course it's not a raya gemura. It's not even a tchilas raya. For a few reasons. First of all, that sugi talks about goyim. It doesn't talk about Jews. Ra v'yater goyim. Hitel lehem sheva mitzvos. What does that have to do with a Jew? Both the Posuk and the Gemara speak about goyim. Another kasha is the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. In the beginning of Gimel, as in Bava Kama, the Gemara says, Einoi mekavlem schak mitzvah b'voisa. All the goyim in the world are still chayav sheva mitzvahs. And nobody could be matir goyim and say you don't need to be mekayim sheva mitzvahs. All the Gemara means to say is, Einoi mekavlem schak mitzvah b'voisa. So for two reasons, we have no proof at all from Rov Yater Goy. ובגט in פרש רש"י, שהמוסר פורק כל תורה, יש לו מכיוון שמוסר, לסוי מיחמר, הרי מוסר חבר גם להעביר על דס מוישה וישראל, and therefore, יש הדין of a goy. ומצינו בעזרא, יכולים כל רכישו, ויבודל מקהל הגוי, למשמע שהוציאה מכלל ישראל. And that's also a time. And this posik deals with a vast majority of Jews that stayed in Babel, and they refused to join Ezra and Nehemiah to come to Eretz Yisrael to build the Bayis Sheni. And Ezra decreed, Yachlam kol rachusha v'yabodel mekahal hagoyim. Mashmi shoitzia machlal Yisrael, that's totally unreasonable. The Mishnah Perek Daled Masechet Kiddushin writes, a sorrow So in the vast majority of Jews, and Dafka, Toivim shebehem stayed in Bavel. Some surface interpretation of the pasuk is Hoitzio Mechlal Yisrael Dinam Kigoyim. Nowhere do we find such a Gemara. Asora Yorichsim Olo Bavel, and the Mishnah says most of the people that came from Bavel with Ezra and Nehemiah were Psuli Yorichsim, Chalolim and Shtukim and Mamzerim and Asinim and Sora Yorichsim described in the Mishnah, the last Perek in Masechet Kiddushin. So anyway, but the biggest pen in the Sam Sefer is, and Moised is an individual. It's not like the Kutim were a nation. They were a people. They came from a distant land. They came from Kuta. Originally, they were Goyim. Their conversion was questionable. But a Moised is an individual. Could the father be a Goy and his children be Jewish? If we say that a Moised has a din of a Goy, Ben lekula, ben lechumra. So this some sofer is a Gavandik Chiddush. However, 600 years ago, in the days of the terrible Spanish Inquisition, Gedolei Yisrael dealt. What is the status of the thousands of Jews that converted to Christianity? So we all know the story of the Marranos. So in those days, a year ago, I visited Malaga with a group of tired American Balabatim. Malaga is in southern Spain. And I gave shiurim, and all the shiurim were about the tkufa of the Spanish Inquisition. So this is the Mishnah. Who came with Ezra and Nehemiah? Kahana Levi Yisrael Chalolim Gerim Charurim Mamzerim Nasinim Shtuki Asufi. Those are the ones that came. Anyway, so Spanish Jewry was divided into 3 different segments. The majority went into exile. They left Spain because the authorities, the Inquisition, said, either they leave the land or convert. If you want to stay here and you don't convert, that's the auto de fe. They were tortured, burned, killed b'misa mishum. So there are 3 segments. Many of them left the land. They left all the possessions. Sometimes they left family members and they went into exile. And that's when Polish Jewry flourished, and many went all the way up north to Amsterdam, to Holland. So about 1/3 left the land. Many converted, and they became Mumrim, Mishumodim, they converted to Christianity. And then the 3rd segment was those that pretended to convert, but they continued to practice Yiddishkeit, the Machteres, in hiding. And the Gedolim dealt, how do we deal with those that converted to Christianity? And there's a tshuva in Maharajdam. The Maharajdam was maybe the greatest posek of that generation, and Ebenezer Simon Yud. He brings that many generations earlier, when Jews were confronted with a similar situation in the Islamic lands, and that is when the Rambam writes, Igeres Teman and Igeres Ashmad, when Jews under the Muslims were confronted with the same situation, and the authorities demanded that they convert to Islam. And the Marashdam writes, there was a machlokes between the 2 greatest Gaonim, Rabbeinu Sadi Gaon and Rabbeinu Hanano. Rabbeinu Sadi Gaon writes that those Mishumodim, Dinam Kigoyim, Bein Lekula, Bein Lechumra, Ve'ein Chosheshim Lekidusheim. If one of them was Mekadosh and Isha, she doesn't have a din of Eishes Ish. Rabbeinu Sadi Gaon was Mata and Eishes Ish. Because if they converted to Christianity, they no longer had a status of Judaism. Rabbeinu Hanano disagreed. Maharshal Choch Mishloim Yavamis Tezayin. Dealing with the Seres Shvutim. So a Seres Shvutim is one of the historical mysteries. There's a machlokes, perek chelek in Sanhedrin. Says Hashem atitim lachzor or inam atitim lachzor. And the Says Hashem brings us back to the story of the Kutim. Sancherev exiled 10 tribes. The only ones that were left were Shevet Yehuda, Shevet Levi, all the other 10 were exiled. And they were lost. And that's a machlokes in the Gemara at the end of days. Will they come back or they're lost forever? And the lesson of the Gemara is Asum Kegoyim Gemurim. So that is the other half of the story of Kutim, the Jews that were exiled and the Kutim that were brought to Eretz HaShemron instead of them. The Marshal writes that when a sect leaves the fold and they see themselves as belonging to the nations and they no longer see themselves as Jews, Kemat dinam kigoyim, Kemat. And the Mashal wonders, what do you mean? A Jew can't become a non-Jew. So Mashal was younger than the Marashtam, but he wasn't aware of the Judas of Marashtam. So this is a machlokes between the Marshal and the Marshal. Keren Oira, Yevamis Yud Zayin. The Keren Oira was one of the greatest Talmidim of Reb Chaim Evelazhin. Keren Oira Yevamis Yud Zayin says something similar to the Sam Sofer, but the difference is Keren Oira basis is Pshat on the Gemara Yevamis Yud Zayin, and that makes sense. Some Sofer's rayas are somewhat problematic. The other difference is the Keren Oira speaks about an entire sect, a group. The Sam Sofer deals about Moisa, that's an individual. And that's the big difference. What Sefer do we have on the screen? Is that the Keren Oira? Just share with me what we have on the screen.
That's the Keren
Oira. Yeah. Okay, so okay, great. You see, he quotes the Mashal, and he writes, Ve'efshar, the kol shenitma beyomim hakadmonim bein oivdei kechovim, o yedino legamre k'oivdei kechomim. V'yesh lekayim beze, divra Mashal shekosav, b'toisvis, v'marsho hiksha olav, u'lefi anal yesh loimar, kol shenitma bein hagoyim, hareu bechlal tekon hazo, liyoses, k'oivdei kechomim goma. We need to go back a few lines. We need to go back a few lines to the top of this. Ve'efshalom, that any kedushin kommer to asam koivi chovem. Kio kedushin, aber l'sham ela l'chayri efshal asos koivi chovem. Kivin shemen adin Yisrael amem. Aber melisna de klod ha'maise ki bonem zorem yordo mashma de l'kol mile koivi chovem shavini. And then he writes, this is the powerful line. Val pi ha'neviim v'ruach ha'kodesh nasa zois. Because Chazal quote a posik and Navi. And then the Keren Oira says, and maybe al pi Nevi'im and Ruach HaKodesh, the authority was given to Chachmei Yisrael even in later generations. Kol shenitma beyomim hakadmonim bein hagoyim, dinoi ka'ovid kechavim. And that explains the story of Aseret Shvotim and Kutim. Karaim, because they appeared on the stage of history at a much later period. In that period, Chazal the Chachamim no longer had the authority to decree on a segment of Klal Yisrael, lo yitziam min haklal, and to decree that they have a din of goyim. Is this sugya relevant? I'll tell you why I think it's relevant. Tumas Amaisis midrabanan, Shvius bismanas edrabanan. But when a majority of the Jewish people will come back to Eretz Yisrael, mitzvah satluis voros will be min haTorah, and we're not far from there. We're not far from there. In the very near future, b'derech hateva, most of the Jews will live in Eretz Yisrael. And that'll be a total toss-up. all the halachas of mitzvahs, at least bullets, will be changed. Shvius would be deorized. That'll be very difficult to cope with. So my argument always was, it'll never happen because there are billions of Jews in the world. Nobody is aware that they're Jewish. But we are the most ancient nation in the world. We go back to Muhammad Sinai thousands of years. There should be more Jews in the world than Chinese. So yes, the Judaism depends on your mother. So wherever there's a non-Jewish woman in the middle, her ancestors will no longer be Jewish. But still, there should be a billion Jews in the world. But if we accept the Keranoira, the Marash Dam, all those millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Jews out there, nitma'u bein hagoyim, they no longer have any connection to Yiddishkeit whatsoever, then ein dinam ki Yisrael. And in the near future, most of the Jews that identify as Jews will be living in Israel. So this is a question that will have drastic implications.
Wow.
Yisrael shenitmo bein hagoyim. Does he have a din Yisrael or a din goy? So when we learn the sources, it seems to be a theoretical discussion, very interesting one. But in the very near future, it will have very dramatic ramifications in Halacha. Okay, this is our sugya for today. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you. I suggest you learn this simon because it's a very important simon. And not everybody agrees with my opinion, but I think when you go through it, it's very convincing.